It is legal in England to smack children if it can be demonstrated that the smack was reasonable punishment. That's not true in Scotland and Wales. No physical punishment's allowed. No defence of reasonableness is accepted. But the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health has given its backing to an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, an amendment tabled by a Labour MP, Jess Sato, which would remove the reasonable punishment defence in England, thus banning smacking. The amendment, and the support of the doctors, has reignited this old debate about smacking as a tool of parenting, about that and about whether the law should be involved in upholding the right to smack or removing the right to smack. It was an issue on which Nikki Campbell took calls on 5 Live this morning.
The question that the Royal College has to answer is, why do you want a mum who taps a tot on the back of the hand to be treated as a child abuser and prosecuted for assault? Because that is the real world effect of removing the reasonable chastisement defence.
I am a mum of 2 girls. As parents, we're there to be to safeguard our children and to teach them responsibility. And for me to lose control enough to hit my own child, I think it doesn't demonstrate proper thought through behaviour as an adult.
I'm not advocating smacking children, but in this day and age, children are so savvy that they know that there is no punishment, and there doesn't appear to be any punishment put in place to stop children from doing these antisocial things.
There is a real challenge, I think, about the terminology. Reasonable to one person is completely unreasonable to another. And I think the problem that we've got is that there is no consistency in law currently, and children do not have equal protection.
Well, let's talk through this with Dr. Ashley Frawley, a sociologist, visiting research fellow at the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies at the University of Kent, and Dr. Mary Han Munt, who's a psychologist and hosts the How Not to Screw Up Your Kids podcast. Hello, both of you. Thank you. Ashley, first of all, talk us through what is your view of smacking children?
Yeah, it's a really difficult debate because no one wants to sound like they don't care about children. So when you want to question the nature of the studies that are being used here, you're always vulnerable to being accused of not caring about children. But we need to be really clear, like this might be a really well-meaning proposal, and it is, but you have to think about what it means in the real world. What you could wind up doing is, this is what's happened in Scotland at the moment, is social workers are talking about how they want to give help and support to families, but they find themselves having to escalate quite trivial incidences to police with everything that entails, arresting the parent, separation of the parent from the child. And even if no charges are ultimately filed, this is a really terrifying experience to go through for children and for parents. I think there are other things that we can do if we want to support families, if we really decide as a society that we don't want to have corporal punishment in the home as something that we do, then let's have that conversation and let's give guidance to families. I think we're skipping forward to criminalization, which has extraordinarily harsh results.
And Ashley,
based on very flimsy evidence.
Ashley, are you saying you wouldn't smack children yourself, but the criminalising of it is just a sort of sledgehammer? It's too much and causes more problems than it solves. Is that or are you saying, well, smacking can have its place?
Personally, I'm a mother of a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and it's not something that I've decided to do in my family, but I do know that a lot of parents employ this quite consciously. It's something that they do as part of their loving discipline. They think it's important to set boundaries, and these are not child abusers. And to kind of draw no line, currently the law recognizes that exists, and that there's a huge difference between that and beating a child. Now you erase that, and there's no difference between a smack on the back of the legs and assault. There's no difference. And in fact, trying to get any of the statistical clarity around prosecution has been very difficult because everything, for instance, in Scotland, any prosecutions, it's all assault. We don't know what those numbers actually represent.
So you don't know, you're not grading, if you like. Mary Han, I'd be interested in your response to all that.
Yeah, I think we're slightly talking about the wrong thing here. The idea is that smacking is being used, and this particular loophole that we continue to have in England and Northern Ireland, as a way that is deemed as a way of correcting children's behaviour. But the evidence is very clear that it is not an effective way of teaching children to make better choices. We should be looking at other ways of doing that. And it's about inherently knowing that the child is a good person on the inside. They're just making a poor choice in the moment. And smacking does not effectively communicate that to the child. It's not instructive, it's a power dynamic. And it's not about demonising parents that have in the past chosen that. It's setting a very clear statement that there are more effective ways that we can teach our children to become well-adjusted adults beyond smacking.
And is criminalising it? I mean, parents make all sorts of mistakes every day when they're bringing up their kids, and you're saying it's a mistake. But is criminalising it proportional to the offence?
I think that's something for the policymakers to look at. I understand that there are nuances here around this, and the last thing we want to be doing is demonising parents. But it's being really clear that it is not a way of teaching children how to manage behaviour. As an adult, we wouldn't do that to another adult and deem it to be acceptable. So why would we deem it to be acceptable as an adult to a child?
And Marianne, you think the evidence is absolutely clear cut? Because I got the feeling that Ashley thought it was a little bit more ambivalent.
I think it's more a case that the evidence is clear cut in its lack of effectiveness. There is some sort of lack of clarity as to whether it causes negative effects on children later on in life.
And Ashley, can you just come back in on that last point on the evidence of the effectiveness of smacking?
Right. So the evidence on effectiveness is actually really difficult to gauge because randomized controlled trials were stopped in the 90s because of campaigning to stop these from happening. But the randomized controlled trials, which is the strongest evidence that we have, did show that it was effective for oppositional defiance. But regardless of whether or not it's effective, even if it weren't effective, that's not a reason to bring the police to the door. Do we really want to criminalize people because they're parenting in a way that some groups deem ineffective? And also, I'm very pleased to hear that you've pointed out that the evidence around negative outcomes is unclear. And I think that is extremely important because there's a serious problem with the evidence base with parenting studies in that they're all based on the vast majority of them are based on middle-class Anglo-American families, that is white middle-class families. And it problematizes working-class families, migrant families, and then they take this to the global south and you get people being unfairly penalized for not living up to a middle-class ideal of how children should be raised. Now it's a threat of criminal law. Ashley
Frawley and Marianne Munt, thank you both very much. A really, really interesting discussion there.